"The lake house is perfect for our wedding," my sister told her planner as she booked a 200-guest ceremony. "The family owns it together." She even signed the liability waiver as a co-owner. Everyone acted like the property was already hers. I said nothing and let the plans move forward. Then the insurance company ran a routine ownership check. Within hours, her deposit check was frozen. The planner's contract was suspended, and every phone in the family started ringing. I was 3 hours into a client presentation when the call came. My office in Seattle looks out over Puget Sound on clear days, which that Tuesday was. The Henderson account had been dragging for 6 weeks, and I had finally pulled together the analysis that would either close the deal or lose it. My assistant had blocked my calendar for the entire afternoon. No interruptions. The number that appeared on my phone was a 360 area code. Western Washington, but not Seattle. I almost let it go to voicemail. My first thought was my neighbor at the lake house, an older man who sometimes called when he noticed something off about the property. I picked up on the third ring. Andrea Liu introduced herself as a claims specialist with Premier Event Insurance. She apologized for interrupting and asked if she had reached the owner of a property at a specific address on Lakeshore Road. I said yes. She said she was calling before proceeding with a liability coverage application because she had found a significant discrepancy in the ownership records and wanted to clarify the situation directly with the verified owner before deciding how to proceed. That was when I understood this was not a call about a fallen branch. She spoke in the calm, measured tone of someone accustomed to delivering information that upended people's days. The application was for a large private event, a wedding ceremony and reception, 200 guests. The applicant had listed the property as a shared family estate and signed as co-owner with full legal authority to authorize events at the location. Standard verification pulled county records, she said. Your name is the only one on the deed. There are no co-owners, no joint tenancy arrangement, no trust structure, just you. I pulled the Henderson file off my desk and set it face down. Who filed the application? I said. She told me my sister's name. I was quiet for a long moment. I asked her to hold everything and send me every document she had. She said she would have them to me within 2 hours. I thanked her, ended the call, and told my assistant through the glass to reschedule everything for the following week and hold all other calls. She looked at my face and did not ask questions. My grandfather was 84 when his cardiologist used the phrase quality of life rather than treatment plan. He lived 40 minutes north of Portland in the house where my mother had grown up, a narrow craftsman with a deep front porch and a vegetable garden he had maintained for 4 decades. He had survived my grandmother by 12 years, learned to cook his own meals, kept the garden producing through the summer, and driven himself to appointments until the winter he turned 82, when his cardiologist quietly suggested that era was ending. My mother lived in Portland, 25 minutes away. My sister lived in Tacoma, 2.5 hours north. I was in Seattle, 3 hours. When the doctor said he needed more consistent support, there was a family conversation. My mother said she was in the middle of a critical fundraising push for the arts nonprofit she had spent 15 years building. She could manage weekends when things slowed down. My sister said she simply could not handle watching him decline. She had always been close to him when things were good, she said, and watching him get worse would be too emotionally difficult. She needed to protect herself. So I drove to Portland on a Friday night in October and stayed. I told my employer I needed to reduce my hours. I moved into his guest room and learned his medication schedule. 7 prescriptions across 3 pharmacies, 3 of which had to be timed around meals, and 1 of which required weekly blood draws to monitor dosage levels and adjust as needed. I drove him to appointments twice a week on average. The cardiologist, the nephrologist, the primary care physician who coordinated everything. In difficult weeks, it was more. I cooked the low-sodium diet his doctors had prescribed, which he found depressing, and made dry jokes about when he was feeling well. I handled the bills, the insurance correspondence, the pharmacy coordination, the occasional difficult calls with medical billing offices where something had been coded incorrectly or a prior authorization had lapsed. My mother came on some weekends in better months. My sister came twice in 22 months. My grandfather was not sentimental about what I was doing in the way people sometimes expect. He made dry observations about the sodium restrictions. He asked about my work and my life. He taught me his mother's pierogi recipe one afternoon when he was having a good week. He told me stories about his childhood I had never heard. In the final months, when getting to the bathroom at night became unreliable, I moved a cot into the hallway outside his room so I could hear him. That was the winter I did not sleep more than 4 consecutive hours for approximately 5 months. I was 34 years old. I told myself afterward that it would have been worse to not be there, and I believe that is true. He died in August of the following year. His attorney read the will 6 weeks later. He left the Craftsman house to my mother. He left his car and personal effects to be divided among the family as they saw fit. He left a financial account to me, specifically and solely to me, with a handwritten note filed alongside the will that said, "This is for the years." The account held $647,000. My mother cried at the reading. It took me a moment to understand that the tears were not grief. She had been expecting the estate to be distributed differently. She said later that it was not fair, that he should have split everything equally among the family. My sister agreed with her. They spent the next 8 months making this known at holidays and phone calls and text messages that began with, "I'm not trying to make you feel guilty, but," and then proceeded to do exactly that. I did not argue with them. I did not enumerate the promotion I had declined, the relationship that had ended partly because I had been unavailable and 3 hours away for nearly 2 years, the months of sleep deprivation that took longer than I expected to recover from. I did not produce an accounting. My grandfather had made a decision, and it was his decision to make. I trusted that he understood what he was doing. I bought the lake house the following May. $580,000. A property I had driven past once during a weekend trip years earlier and filed under someday without much expectation. 3 bedrooms, a dock, 2 acres on a quiet stretch of water an hour south of Seattle. I had the deed put in my name. I paid the property taxes and the maintenance costs from my own income. In the second summer, I replaced the dock planking and installed a new security system. In the third year, I repainted the interior in colors I chose alone. It was mine. That was not a complicated fact. The first time my family visited the lake house, I hosted Thanksgiving. That was a choice I made willingly, believing that having people in a space I owned and controlled would feel different from gatherings at my mother's house, where I had spent 30 years being the reliable one who arrived early, stayed late, handled logistics, and got thanked in the abstract way people thank a piece of furniture they find indispensable. I thought ownership might change the dynamic. I was wrong about that. My mother arrived and walked through every room making observations in the particular way she has, where the observations are framed as appreciation, but carry an implicit counter-suggestion. The kitchen is so functional, she said, which meant she would have chosen different cabinets. The bedrooms are very cozy, which meant she found them small. She found the dock and stood at the end of it looking at the water for a long time and said this would be perfect for a gathering. She said it the way people say things they have already decided, not the way people say things they are considering. It was a categorization, not a question. My sister arrived with her then boyfriend and walked directly to the largest bedroom without asking. She said it like she was choosing from a menu of offered options. She set her bags down and I heard the door close before I had said anything. Over dinner, my mother talked about the property in a collective register I had not yet identified as a pattern. She mentioned that her friend's daughter was having trouble finding a wedding venue for the following summer and said, looking at the water rather than at me, that this would obviously be a beautiful place for something like that. I said I was not planning to use the property for events. She said of course she was just noting it as an observation and moved the conversation along. That was the beginning of the collective noun. Over the next 2 years, in my family's language, the lake house became our place, not my place, our place. The shift was gradual and in retrospect deliberate, not because I think my mother planned it consciously, but because the grammar of possession is a habit and she had spent her entire adult life treating resources within her proximity as shared family resources rather than individually owned ones. My sister asked to use the property for a friend's bridal shower the following spring. I said I would think about it and never followed up, which in my family's language was taken as approval pending logistics. I did not correct that interpretation. I let it pass because correcting it would have required a direct confrontation I was not ready for. My mother suggested hosting Christmas at the lake house that winter. She described the property to people I had never met as though it had been in the family for generations, which it had not. It had been in my possession for 18 months, purchased with money that my family had spent 8 months calling unfair. I said nothing. I was waiting for the boundary to assert itself by being obvious. I believed that a property I owned with a deed, with a mortgage, with an assessed value approaching $600,000 communicated its status in ways that did not require me to spell it out. I did not understand at the time that my silence had a cost and that the cost was being paid forward. My sister has never been careless in the way people are careless by accident. She is careless in the way people are careless when they have learned, through long experience, that the consequences of their carelessness are absorbed by someone else. The mechanism is consistent across years and contexts and scales. She takes something. It gets damaged, consumed, diminished, or not returned. She expresses regret in the tone of someone surprised by an outcome rather than responsible for it. The family normalizes the sequence. The relevant person, which has most often been me, is expected to absorb the cost and not make it a thing. I have a list in my head that I do not produce often because producing it makes me sound like someone keeping score, which in family systems is considered worse than being the person who generates the score in the first place. But the list is accurate and I know every item on it. When I was 23, she borrowed my car for a weekend trip to see a friend in Eugene. She returned it with a cracked windshield and said a rock must have hit it on the highway. She said it with the mild, philosophical tone of someone describing weather. Accidents happen. I paid $340 for the repair. She never mentioned it again, and I did not bring it up because bringing it up would have made me the difficult one. When I was 27, I bought a silk jacket I had wanted for 3 months and saved for on purpose. It was the most expensive piece of clothing I had owned at that point, and I was aware of that. My sister borrowed it for a work event and returned it with a stain on the left panel that the dry cleaner said was permanent, likely oil-based, something from food. She said dry cleaning is so expensive anyway, which was not an apology but a reframe. She was implying I had set unreasonable expectations by wanting a borrowed garment returned intact. The jacket was unwearable. I donated it. She did not offer to replace it. When I was 31, she called and said she needed somewhere to stay in Seattle for a few days while she looked for a new place to live. A short-term situation, she said. I offered my couch. She moved into my bedroom on day 3 without asking, on the reasoning, explained to me after the fact that the couch was uncomfortable and my bed was just sitting there unused. I was still living in the apartment. I had simply been sleeping on my own couch rather than conflict. She stayed 6 weeks. When she left, she said she really appreciated how easygoing I was, and I understood that the compliment was also a mechanism. By naming my compliance as a virtue, she foreclosed the possibility of my naming it as a cost. The student loan cosign is the entry I return to most often. When she was 23, she asked me to cosign a private loan for her final graduate semester. Said she had a job lined up, she just needed to get through the semester. I cosigned. She made 8 payments and stopped. dropped without telling me. I found out when my credit score dropped 41 points and a collections agency called. She had meant to tell me, she said. The meaning to tell me had apparently functioned in her accounting as equivalent to having told me. It took 3 years for my credit to fully recover. I had been in this pattern long enough to recognize it from multiple angles. The request always arrives framed as temporary and manageable. The execution always produces a consequence that lands on someone else. The accounting never comes due for her. Not because she escapes it deliberately, but because the family system has always routed the cost away from her and toward whoever is most likely to absorb it quietly. That person has almost always been me. The lake house should have been different. I owned it. It was not a jacket or a car or a co-signature on a piece of paper. It was a property with a deed and a county record and an assessed value. I had assumed that a $600,000 asset communicated something about ownership that a borrowed garment had not managed to communicate. I was wrong about that. The asset communicated the same thing the jacket and the car had communicated, which was that I had something worth taking and had not, historically, made the taking difficult. Andrea sent the file at 2:47 in the afternoon. 6 documents, each time-stamped, each bearing my sister's signature. Andrea's cover note summarized the situation in the careful, depersonalized language of an insurance professional who had learned to document everything and characterize nothing more than the facts required. She wrote that she had placed the application on hold pending ownership verification. She wrote that the documentation she was forwarding would speak for itself. She wrote that she wanted to handle the matter carefully and appropriately and asked me to advise her on how I wished to proceed before she made any decisions about escalation. I read each document twice before I called her back. The insurance application was a standard event liability form, the kind used for private gatherings at residential properties. My sister had completed every field. She had listed the property address. She had listed herself as applicant and event coordinator. In the section asking for the applicant's relationship to the property, there was a drop-down field and a text entry field. She had selected co-owner from the drop-down and written shared family estate in the text box. That was not carelessness. A careless person might have written family member or something imprecise. She had selected the option that conveyed legal authority. She had selected it deliberately. At the bottom of the application was a certification paragraph in standard insurance form language. By signing below, the applicant certifies that all information provided is accurate and complete, that the applicant has legal authority to authorize events at the property listed, and that the applicant holds or will hold adequate liability insurance coverage for the duration of the event. My sister had signed her full name and dated it 3 weeks prior. The second document was the venue liability waiver, which was longer and more specific. It addressed the waterfront location, the dock, the open water, activities involving alcohol and guests who might be near the water's edge at night. It addressed vendor access, delivery windows, setup and breakdown procedures, damage liability. It named the property owner as a party to the waiver. My sister had typed her own name in the property owner field. The certification line at the bottom read, "I certify that I am the legal property owner or duly authorized representative of the property listed above, with full legal authority to execute this waiver on behalf of the property." She had signed below it. The third document was the venue authorization form the wedding planner had required from all clients using a private residential property. It authorized Cascade Wedding Design to enter the property to conduct walkthroughs, coordinate with vendors on site, receive deliveries on behalf of the venue, and manage vendor scheduling throughout the event day, and set up and breakdown periods. My sister had signed as venue owner and representative. The fourth document was the wedding planner's contract, 22 pages. The coordination fee was $12,000, paid in 2 installments, the first at signing, the second at 90 days. The second installment had cleared 31 days before Andrea's call. The contract listed the venue as Patterson Family Lake House and noted in the fee section, venue fee waived, confirmed family property. It included a detailed site diagram on page 14. A professional had drawn the ceremony layout, cocktail hour placement, reception configuration, and parking logistics. The diagram was precise. It showed the dock labeled as cocktail hour venue, the south lawn with 200 chairs arranged in ceremony rows, the interior of the main house with round tables configured for reception seating, and the porch as overflow. Someone had walked my property. Someone had measured it, drawn it, and produced a professional document from it. I had not known any of this was happening. The overnight accommodation section of the contract allocated the 3 bedrooms by description: primary suite, water view room, garden room. Each was assigned to specific members of the wedding party. The primary suite was listed for the bride and groom on the wedding night. The water view room, which contains my bed in my house, was allocated to the matron of honor and her husband. The 5th document was a vendor coordination summary listing all 7 contractors. The 6th was a deposit payment schedule showing what had been paid and what remained due. I called James Whitfield at 4:15. James Whitfield had been my contracts attorney for 4 years, since I had needed someone to review a consulting agreement that looked standard until he found 3 clauses that would have transferred intellectual property rights I needed to retain. He was methodical and did not speculate. When he said something was serious, he meant it precisely and not for emphasis. He called me back within the hour. I forwarded him all 6 documents while we were on the phone, and he asked me to give him 2 hours to review them. He called back at 7. "This is serious," he said. "More serious than a boundary violation. Let me walk you through it from the legal exposure angle." He started with my sister. She had signed multiple documents misrepresenting material facts to induce vendors to provide services. That was the core issue. She had represented herself as co-owner of a property she did not co-own, certified legal authority she did not possess, possess, and use those misrepresentations to execute contracts with vendors who had no independent reason to verify the claim. Each vendor had relied on her representation in good faith and committed resources accordingly. The insurance company's concern about fraud is legitimate, he said. Under Washington law, misrepresentation of material facts to obtain insurance coverage constitutes insurance fraud, which carries both criminal and civil penalties. Even if no coverage was ultimately issued, the act of submitting a fraudulent application creates exposure. He moved to the vendors. They had contracted based on false premises. Those contracts were voidable, meaning I could void them or a court could on the grounds of fraudulent inducement. Whether the vendors would pursue my sister civilly was their decision to make, but they had standing to do so, and the deposits they held were almost certainly non-refundable under their standard contract terms. Then he moved to my own exposure, which I had not yet fully thought through. If the event proceeds at your property, he said, you're exposed as the property owner of record regardless of what your sister told the vendors. If a guest slips on the dock and sustains an injury, the claim runs to the owner. If a vendor's employee is injured on site during setup, same result. The event liability coverage your sister applied for names her as the insured, not you. You have no coverage for an event you did not authorize. The gap between what she represented and what is legally true is entirely your problem the moment someone is hurt. What are my options? I said. Cease and desist to all 7 vendors and the planner tonight. We notify each one that the property authorization they received was obtained through fraudulent misrepresentation, that the actual property owner has not authorized the event, and that any attempt to proceed will result in legal action against all parties. We also notify the insurance company formally. Pause. Your sister will lose her deposits. In Washington, vendors are generally entitled to retain deposits when a contract fails due to the client's fraud or misrepresentation. The deposits compensate for time and resources allocated. The planner in particular has been actively engaged for 4 months. Her $12,000 is almost certainly gone. What about my mother? Long pause. If she signed a vendor document, she has inserted herself into the legal picture. It doesn't rise to the level of your sister's exposure, but she is not a bystander. We should include her in our communications. I told him she had signed the catering contract as a reference. Then she needs to receive formal notice that she has no authority over this property and that any further action facilitating this event will result in legal consequences. He was quiet for a moment. I can have draft letters to you by morning. Send them to everyone, I said. Tonight, if possible. He had them to me by 9. The letters went out at 11 the following morning. Email and overnight courier to all 7 vendors, the wedding planner, and the insurance company. James had drafted a clean master document and tailored it to each recipient. The core language was consistent. The property at the listed address was solely owned by the undersigned. Rachel Patterson Moore had no legal ownership interest and no authority to represent herself as co-owner or authorized event representative. Any contracts executed with her for an event at this location were void due to fraudulent misrepresentation of material facts. The actual owner had not authorized the event and explicitly prohibited use of the property for any purpose without her written consent. The letter to the insurance company was slightly different in tone, more formal, more documentation heavy, and it attached a certified copy of the deed to make the ownership record unambiguous. I had asked James to draft a separate letter to my mother. He had been careful with it. It acknowledged that her role appeared to have been secondary, a reference signature rather than a primary authorization, but it established clearly that she had no ownership interest in the property, no authority to represent the property in any capacity, and that any future attempt to facilitate events at the property or represent herself or any family member as having authority over it would result in immediate legal action. The responses from vendors came back over the following 18 hours. The planner called me directly at 2 in the afternoon. She was professional and composed in the way of someone who had seen difficult situations before, though perhaps not this specific configuration of difficult. She said she needed to review the documentation with her own legal counsel before taking any formal position, but wanted to hear the situation from my perspective. I told her she could have 15 minutes. She asked 2 questions. Had there been any verbal authorization at any point, and had I known about the planning at any stage? I said no to both. She thanked me and said her attorney would be in touch. The caterer sent an email within the hour acknowledging receipt and placing all planning activity on hold pending legal review. The florist called in the early evening and went through 3 emotional registers in about 4 minutes. Confusion, then anger directed at my sister rather than at me, then a resigned practicality about the deposit situation. She said she had 2 other clients who had wanted that weekend and had turned them down to hold it. I said I was sorry she was in that position. I meant it. The tent company responded by the end of the business day. No phone call, just an attorney's letterhead acknowledgement of the cease and desist and a statement that the contract was considered voided. The DJ company replied the following morning. The transportation company asked a single clarifying question about whether a modified event at an alternate location was possible, and when I said I had no information about that and that any arrangement would need to be negotiated directly with my sister, they acknowledged and closed the inquiry. The overnight accommodations coordinator sent a brief response saying she was sorry to hear about the situation and wished everyone involved the best. I remember that one specifically because it was the only response that acknowledged I was a person rather than a party to a legal dispute. At 3:47 in the afternoon, 37 minutes after the first vendor received the email, my sister called. She did not start with anger. I had been expecting anger. I had been braced for it since the moment I approved the letters. Instead, she started with disbelief, which landed differently than I anticipated and, for a brief moment, made me wonder if I had misread something. "What did you do?" she said. Her voice had the quality of someone who had just opened a door and found a room that was not supposed to be there. I told her what I had done. Cease and desist letters to all 7 vendors and the planner. Formal notification to the insurance company. Legal documentation establishing that the property was not available for her event and had never been authorized for it. "You just destroyed my wedding. You were planning a 200-person event at a property you do not own," I said. "You signed documents misrepresenting your legal status to the people you hired. You did this over the course of 8 months without telling me any of it. What I stopped was a fraud. It's family property." "It is not family property. It is my property. The county has one name in the ownership record, and that name is mine. There is no arrangement, written or verbal, that gives you any authority over that property. You know this. Grandpa would have wanted the family to share it. Grandpa left the money specifically to me, in a will written by his attorney, signed by witnesses, probated in court. You have known this for 3 years. Your mother filed an objection to the distribution and lost. This is documented. This is not ambiguous." "It wasn't fair," she said. Her voice had shifted. The disbelief was resolving into something harder. "It wasn't fair that you got everything. You always acted like you were the only one who cared about him." I said I got something, not everything, something, because I was there. 22 months. Every appointment, every prescription, every medication adjustment. Every night he needed help getting to the bathroom at 3 in the morning. I declined a promotion. I ended a relationship. I slept on a cot in a hallway for 5 months. I was there. Then I said, "Where were you?" Silence. I let it sit for a moment. Then I said, "You told me you couldn't handle watching him decline. You said it was too hard emotionally. You protected yourself, and I showed up, and he made a decision about that in his will, and his decision is not my fault, and it is not my debt to repay." She was quiet for a longer time. Then she said, "Mom said you'd be fine with it." I put the phone down on my desk and looked at it. I picked it back up. I said slowly and specifically, "Mom knew." She started to walk it back immediately. She said Mom had just helped with some of the logistics, the timing, what vendors to look for, general things. She said it the way people say things they did not intend to say, faster than the rest of the sentence, with a register change that told me she understood she had disclosed something she had not planned to disclose. I said, "Did your mother sign any documents?" My sister hesitated. I said, "Did she sign a vendor contract?" She said Mom had signed the catering contract as a reference. She said it was just a formality. She said it didn't mean anything. I said I need to end this call and speak with my attorney. I ended the call. I sat with the phone on my desk for a while before I dialed. I had built a version of this situation in my head from the moment Andrea called me, a version where my sister had acted unilaterally, had made assumptions, had failed to consult anyone, had presented it all as a fait accompli that the rest of the family was simply going along with because that was how things worked when my sister wanted something. That version was manageable. My sister was impulsive and had poor boundaries and took things without asking. That was a known quantity. It was something I had developed over years, a set of responses to. But that was not the version that had just emerged. My mother knew, not learned about it recently, not failed to ask the right questions, knew and helped and signed a document. She had participated in the planning. She had reviewed vendors. She had signed the catering contract. She had done all of this while knowing better than anyone that the property belonged to me and not to the family. She had complained about that fact for 8 months. She had told me in 3 separate phone calls during the estate process that she thought Grandpa had made a mistake. She had filed a formal objection to the distribution and lost. She understood the ownership record with perfect clarity, and she had helped plan a wedding there anyway. I thought about the Christmas gathering the prior year where she had said, with studied casualness, that my sister was planning something special for the summer and she hoped I would be in a good place about family by then. I had not understood what she meant. I had taken it as one of her periodic ambient references to the estate tension, the ongoing undercurrent of feeling in our family, that I had done something wrong by inheriting money that had been left to me. I had let it pass without engaging. She had been testing a reaction. She had been gauging whether I was going to be a problem before the plans advanced further. My non-response had been taken as clearance. I thought about how many conversations had happened without me. My sister on the phone with vendors, my mother reviewing catering menus, probably at the kitchen table of the house she had inherited and apparently found insufficient compensation for not inheriting mine. Save the dates going to 200 people. Hotel blocks reserved in a town 40 minutes from my property. A professional planner measuring my south lawn and drawing my dock and allocating my bedrooms to people I had never met. 8 months of planning. 8 months during which either one of them could have called me. 8 months during which my mother in particular, the parent, the adult, the person who knew exactly what the ownership record said, could have picked up a phone and said, "Your sister wants to ask you something." 8 months. They had not done that because they had calculated, consciously or not, that the probability of my compliance was higher if I was not asked than if I was. They had built their entire plan on the assumption that I would either not find out or would absorb it the way I had absorbed everything else. My history of compliance was a more reliable foundation for their planning than any legal document. I called James and told him about the catering contract. He was quiet for a moment. "Add your mother to the letter," he said. "I know." I said, "Do it." James drafted the addendum the following afternoon. He was careful with it. My mother's position was legally distinct from my sister's. She had signed as a reference on a vendor contract rather than as an owner or authorizing party on venue documents, which meant her exposure was secondary rather than primary. The letter acknowledged that distinction while making clear that she had inserted herself into a situation with legal consequences. It stated that she had no ownership interest in the property, no authority to represent the property in any capacity capacity to any vendor or institution, and that any further action on her part facilitating the event, including vendor coordination, attending the event at the original location, or misrepresenting the ownership status of the property to any party, would result in immediate legal action. The letter also established, for the formal record, that neither my sister nor my mother had any right to enter the property without my explicit written authorization. James sent it overnight. My mother called me the following morning before 9. She did not lead with anger. She led with injury, which is her preferred register when she has been caught doing something that would otherwise require an accountability she is not willing to offer. She said she could not believe I had brought lawyers into a family matter. She said she had been trying to help my sister have a beautiful wedding. She said she had thought, given everything, that I would come around. I asked her when she had planned to tell me. She said there had never been a good time to bring it up, given how I had been about the estate. She meant that my failure to be gracious about inheriting money that was left to me had created a conversational atmosphere in which telling me my sister was planning a wedding at my property without asking was too sensitive to raise. I said she had 8 months of phone calls in which she could have mentioned it. She said this was different. I said the lake house has my name on the deed. It is not a family resource. It is not available for events I have not authorized. That is not greed. It is not cruelty. And it is not about the estate. It is a property record. She said I was being cruel to my sister. I said my sister planned a 200-person event at my property, signed fraudulent documents to do it, and is now facing nearly $30,000 in unrecoverable deposits because she did not ask permission. I did not create that situation. I responded to it. She said I had always held the estate money over the family. I said I had never mentioned it to any family member since the day the distribution was finalized. She said my silence about it was its own kind of holding it over. I did not have a response to that. It is the kind of argument that is designed to be unanswerable, where complying and not complying are both held as evidence of the same offense. I recognized it because I had heard variations of it my entire life. I said the deed has one name on it. She hung up. The financial accounting came together over the following 2 weeks, and it was thorough. The wedding planner retained her own attorney and communicated exclusively through that channel after our initial call. Her contract was unambiguous, non-refundable payments after 90 days, and my sister had been in the planning process for 4 months and 2 weeks at the time the contract was voided. The full coordination fee of $12,000 was retained. Her attorney sent a formal statement of account. My sister owed nothing additional, but she would receive nothing back. The caterer had a 2-installment deposit structure. My sister had paid $4,250 at signing and a second installment of $4,250 at the 90-day mark. The second installment had cleared 5 weeks before the cease and desist letters went out. Both installments were non-refundable per the contract terms. Total retained $8,500. The florist had taken a 30% deposit on a $7,500 contract, $2,250, plus a separate materials deposit for specialty flowers that had been pre-ordered from a regional grower on a non-cancelable basis. Total retained $3,200. The tent and furniture rental company had taken a $2,800 deposit covering the equipment reservation fee and initial scheduling costs. Their contract contained a specific provision for venue fraud. If the event location was found to be unauthorized, the contract voided, but all deposits were retained to compensate for lost alternative booking opportunities. Non-refundable. The DJ and lighting company retained $750 of a $1,500 deposit as a goodwill partial return. The transportation company retained the full $800. The overnight accommodations coordinator retained $900. Total deposits forfeited $29,950. In addition to the financial loss, the insurance company formally referred the application to their compliance department for fraud review. Andrea Liu sent a final communication to my attorney, advising that the application had been voided and the documentation referred internally. She noted that she could not advise on the outcome of that review and recommended that the applicant consult legal counsel. My attorney had already sent my sister the same recommendation 3 days earlier. My aunt called me 4 days after the cease and desist letters went out. She is my mother's older sister and has spent 4 decades watching my mother operate. She called from her cell number rather than her home line, which meant she was calling in a way she did not want my mother to know about. Your mom told me you refused to let your sister use the lake house, she said. She said you brought lawyers in without warning anyone. I said my sister signed documents claiming to own my property and used those misrepresentations to contract nearly $50,000 in vendor services. I found out from an insurance company, not from my family. Silence. That sounds like Rachel, she said. I said yes. She asked if I was going to pursue it further. The fraud review, civil action. I said I had no interest in pursuing anything beyond what I had already done. I had stopped the event and protected my property. That was the entirety of what I wanted. Your mom is telling people this is about punishing your sister for what she said about the estate, my aunt said. I said if that were true, I had 2 years of opportunities to do something about it and had not used any of them. She was quiet for a moment. She said she was sorry this had happened. She said it was not the first time she had watched my mother help my sister take something that belonged to someone else. I did not ask her to elaborate on that. Some information is more useful held at a distance. She told me I had done the right thing. I thanked her. We did not speak about it again. Most of the extended family waited for the situation to resolve and then oriented toward whatever version of events was easiest to absorb. That is also how these things tend to work. My mother's version, I assume, involved me being cold and litigious and unwilling to let family be family. Other people's versions depended on how much they liked my sister and how much contact they had with my mother. I did not not attempt to manage any of it. My sister found a new venue 3 weeks after the cease and desist. The Millbrook Community Center, 40 minutes from Seattle, books events up to 100 guests in its main hall. It has a covered outdoor patio and a commercial kitchen available for catering. It does not have a waterfront. It does not have a dock. It does not have 2 acres or a view of the water at sunset or 3 bedrooms where 12 members of the wedding party can sleep. The rental fee was $4,200 for the day, which reflects what the market charges for a venue booked 8 weeks out because the desirable dates filled months ago. She rebuilt her vendor relationships from scratch. The photographer from her original contract agreed to honor the new location and date. The florist negotiated a reduced arrangement scale appropriate for a smaller event. She contracted a new caterer. Her original caterer retained the deposits and the relationship was over, and a DJ who had a last-minute cancellation. She cut her guest list from 200 to 94. I know these details because her fiancé's sister told a mutual acquaintance who mentioned it to someone I know, who passed it along. I was not tracking the situation. The updates arrived anyway, the way information moves in extended social circles whether you seek it or not. The wedding happened on June 14th, the original date. My sister posted photographs that evening. She and her husband looked happy. The community center patio was decorated well. Lights, florals, the kind of effort that makes a functional space feel considered. The photographs were well taken. From the outside, it looked like a good wedding. Scaled down, but genuinely good. She sent a message to extended family 2 weeks before the event. Due to unforeseen circumstances beyond our control, the venue has changed and our guest count has been reduced. Some of you will unfortunately not be receiving revised invitations. She did not explain what the circumstances were. She did not name the lake house or the cease and desist letters or the $29,950 in deposits she had lost or the insurance fraud review that was still ongoing at that point. Unforeseen circumstances beyond our control. I thought about that phrase for a while. I am sitting on my dock as I write this. The sun is going down over the water and the light is coming in low and orange off the surface. The tree line on the far shore is going dark. My nearest neighbor is half a mile around the bend. There is no sound except water and birds and the occasional far-off sound of a boat engine fading out toward the north end of the lake. My sister has not spoken to me since April. My mother sends occasional messages that I read and do not answer. My aunt calls on holidays. The rest of the family has distributed itself into whatever version of events it found most comfortable. The security system I installed after the cease and desist letters covers all entry points in the dock. I will know if anyone approaches without permission. I do not expect anyone to. This is my property, bought with money that was left to me specifically and solely by a man who understood what he was leaving and to whom he was leaving it. Named in a deed filed with the county. Maintained by my effort and my income for 4 years. Protected by legal counsel when protecting it became necessary. My sister looked at it and decided it was hers to take. She built 8 months of planning on that assumption, signed documents certifying ownership she did not have, and lost nearly $30,000 learning the assumption was wrong. I said nothing for a long time and let the plans move forward. Then the insurance company called. Property that was never theirs to take.